Welcome back. Today we are diving into a really fascinating explainer. We're going to look under the hood at the structural mechanics of poverty and analyze some heavily debated tax proposals, using iOS safety net and economic metrics as our lens. We'll be breaking down exactly how the current system works, where it sometimes literally traps the very people it's trying to help, and then we'll explore an alternative economic framework from our source material that aims to completely change the game. Let's start right off the bat with this number, 92,000. Right now in Iowa, there are 92,000 individuals living below the poverty line who completely miss out on SNAP benefits, what we usually call food stamps. Just think about that massive utilization gap. And it's not because they don't need the help, it's largely due to administrative barriers and incredibly strict asset limits that just disqualify them, even when their income is definitely low enough. So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. The reality of poverty. 2. Safety nets and traps. 3. Engines of economic mobility. 4. The consumption tax shift. And 5. A stepwise path forward.
Starting with Section 1, the reality of poverty and Iowa's 2024 baseline.
Looking at the 2024 data, Iowa's average poverty rate sits at 11.3%. But, averages can be kinda deceiving. The real story here is that poverty is anything but uniform across the state. The data shows some huge geographic and racial variances. Just look at the county-level extremes. Appanoose County is sitting way up at a 20.4% poverty rate, while Lyon County is down at just 5.3%. And racially, while the poverty rate for white Iowans is 9.3%, it skyrockets to 29.8% for American Indian and Alaska Native populations. It's a very complex, uneven landscape. Now, when we break this down by age, children are actually the most affected group at 13.6%. Seniors have the lowest rate at 8.3%. But here is the wild part. There's a huge disconnect. Only 36% of eligible seniors in Iowa actually enroll in food assistance. They end up hindered by technology barriers, stigma, or they just assume the benefit amount will be too small to bother with. Which brings us to a super important metaphorical framing from the source material. Think of the safety net as a stabilization floor. And honestly, it does that well. When you factor in the supplemental poverty measure, things like Social Security, tax credits, and SNAP actually prevent about 45% of low-income individuals from falling below the baseline. But, and this is a critical distinction, they aren't mobility engines. They catch you, sure, but they don't necessarily propel you upward. Moving on to Section 2, safety nets and traps, and the structural flaws in the floor. When we look at how these massive federal programs actually run, the contrast in administrative efficiency is stark. Programs like Medicaid and SNAP are highly efficient. We're talking 95 to 99% of their funding reaching beneficiaries directly. But then you have TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, which has a surprisingly low direct benefit ratio. Only about 20 to 22% of that funding becomes direct cash for families, with the rest just getting absorbed by infrastructure and program overhead. But the inefficiency isn't just about overhead. It's structural. Have you ever heard of the cliff effect? This happens because of incredibly strict income thresholds. Imagine you get a $1 an hour raise at work. You should absolutely be celebrating, right? But because of this cliff effect, that tiny raise pushes you just over the eligibility line, leading to the total loss of your SNAP or Medicaid. The system ends up unintentionally trapping people, forcing them to literally turn down promotions just to survive. And building right on top of that is what's called the asset trap. Many of these programs have severe asset limits, sometimes as low as just $2,000. So if you try to save up $2,500 for a reliable used car to get to a better job, or you want to save for community college classes, you get disqualified. The system actively penalizes the exact kind of saving and capital accumulation that someone needs to actually escape poverty. Which leads us to Section 3, Engines of Economic Mobility, and the Drivers of Progress. Okay, so if the current safety net sometimes traps people, what actually drives long-term economic mobility? Modern research highlights that environmental and structural factors dictate adult outcomes way more than immediate cash transfers. The primary drivers are things like social capital, meaning friendships across different income classes that provide networking and mentorship, its early education quality, its geography highlighted by the Opportunity Atlas, which shows that moving a kid from a high poverty to a low poverty zip code drastically increases their adult earnings. And fundamentally, it requires policy design that uses gradual benefit phase-outs instead of those sharp cliffs we just talked about. And we really have to rethink these designs, because the current trajectory is honestly pretty alarming. Absolute upward mobility, the statistical likelihood of earning more than your parents did, has dropped from 90% for Americans born in the 1940s down to just 50% for those born in the 1980s. It's essentially a coin toss now. That brings us to Section 4, the consumption tax shift and taxing what you take. So the source proposes an alternative framework to tackle these systemic issues. Notice the core mathematical argument they make against our current setup here. An income tax subjects your savings to double taxation. It snips away at your growth every single year. You're taxed when you earn the money, and then taxed again on the interest or capital gains. Mathematically, it discourages capital formation. A consumption tax, on the other hand, means returns aren't reduced by taxes during their growth period. Structurally, it actually encourages saving. The proposal argues that this creates economic neutrality, expanding what they call economic freedom. Under a value-added tax, or VAT, there is no penalty on working more or earning a higher salary. You get individual control over the timing and size of your tax burden because you only pay tax when you choose to consume. If you save, you defer the tax. It takes all that complex tax bracket geometry out of your personal financial decisions, giving you total investment portfolio autonomy based on actual value rather than just chasing tax loopholes. Now, you might be wondering, and it's a completely fair question, isn't a consumption tax inherently regressive? Doesn't it hurt lower-income earners who spend most of what they make? Yes, but the proposal includes a mathematical offset to neutralize that. Let's walk through this example. Imagine a household earning $20,000. Under a 10% VAT, they might pay $2,000 in taxes over the year. But if you pair that VAT with a rebate of $2,000 and a $5,000 earned income tax credit, the net result is a positive $5,000. The regressive nature is entirely neutralized, making this low-income household a net recipient of the system. Which perfectly tees up our final segment, Section 5, a stepwise path forward, and the EITC bridge. Let's see how all this connects into a cohesive system. The Earned Income Tax Credit, or EITC, acts as the structural opposite to that awful cliff effect we discussed earlier. It operates in 3 phases. Step 1 is the phase-in, where the credit actually increases for every dollar you earn, which heavily encourages people to enter the labor force or pick up extra hours. Step 2 hits a plateau, rewarding stable income without yanking the rug out from under you. And finally, Step 3 is a gradual phase-out. The benefit slowly declines, ensuring that taking a raise always leaves you financially better off. What this specific design does is transform the safety net from a trap into a bridge. By requiring earned income, it ties assistance to labor. It offers true marginal incentives to work. And most importantly, by keeping people engaged in the workforce without the constant fear of losing their livelihoods over a slight pay bump, it actively encourages the long-term skill accumulation needed for true self-sufficiency. It's a completely different paradigm for structuring our economy, which leaves us with this final, provocative thought from today's explainer. How might shifting from taxing productivity and savings to taxing consumption, while bridging the gap with structured pro-work credits, reshape the future of economic mobility in America? It's a really profound question about how we design our society, and we hope this breakdown gave you a clear, structured way to think about the mechanics behind it. Thanks for watching.